In the brutal world of ancient Rome, Marcus Aurelius Maximus, a 28-year-old gladiator known as the Shadow Thief, has earned his fearsome reputation, not just through combat prowess, but through his cunning ability to steal from the wealthy spectators during the chaos of the games. Sold into slavery at age 16 after his family's farm was seized, Marcus has spent 12 years perfecting both his fighting skills and his thievery, driven by a burning desire for freedom and revenge against the corrupt Senator Gaius Brutus, who destroyed his family. When 24-year-old Aurelia Valentina, daughter of the powerful Senator Lucius Valentinus, attends the gladiatorial games for the first time, she becomes Marcus's intended target, but instead of stealing her golden bracelet, he finds himself captivated by her compassionate heart when she shows mercy to a fallen gladiator. As their forbidden love blossoms in secret, Marcus must choose between his quest for vengeance and the woman who has shown him that there's more to life than survival and revenge. Set against the backdrop of political intrigue, brutal arena combat, and the rigid class divisions of Roman society, this is a story of love transcending boundaries, redemption through sacrifice, the ultimate price of freedom. The roar of 50,000 voices shook the very foundations of the Colosseum as Marcus Aurelius Maximus stepped into the blazing afternoon sun. The sand beneath his bare feet was already dark with the blood of the morning's victims, and the metallic scent hung heavy in the sweltering air. He adjusted his grip on the gladius, its leather-wrapped hilt slick with sweat, and surveyed the arena with the calculating eyes of a predator. "Citizens of Rome," the announcer's voice boomed across the amphitheater. "Behold Marcus Maximus, the Shadow Thief, undefeated in 37 battles." Marcus raised his sword, acknowledging the crowd's bloodthirsty cheers, but his mind wasn't on the upcoming fight. His dark eyes scanned the marble tiers above, searching for today's mark. Somewhere in those gilded seats sat his target, another pampered senator's daughter, no doubt, dripping with enough gold to buy his freedom 10 times over. 12 years since Senator Gaius Brutus had seized his family's farm for unpaid taxes that had been paid in full. 12 years since he'd watched his father die defending their land, since he'd seen his mother waste away in grief, since his younger sister Livia had vanished into the slave markets. The memory burned in his chest like molten metal, a constant reminder of why he fought, why he stole, why he survived. "Your opponent approaches." Marcus turned as the gates groaned open. A mountain of a man emerged, Titus the Destroyer, a veteran gladiator whose reputation for brutality was legend, even among the blood-soaked sands of the arena. The crowd's excitement reached a fever pitch, but Marcus barely noticed. His attention had been caught by movement in the senator's box, a flash of deep blue silk, the glint of gold jewelry catching the sunlight. A young woman had just taken her seat beside an older man in senatorial robes. Even from this distance, Marcus could see she was beautiful, with dark hair, elegantly arranged, and skin that spoke of a life spent far from the harsh Roman sun. Perfect. Titus charged with a roar that could wake the dead, his massive frame thundering across the sand. Marcus waited until the last possible moment, then rolled aside with fluid grace, his body moving like water around stone. The crowd gasped as Titus's sword whistled through empty air. Marcus had learned long ago that survival in the arena and success as a thief required more than brute strength. It required intelligence, timing, and the ability to see opportunities where others saw only obstacles. As Titus stumbled past, thrown off balance by his missed strike, Marcus's blade found the gap in his opponent's armor, drawing first blood. The wound wasn't fatal. Marcus rarely killed unless absolutely necessary. Dead gladiators brought investigation, and investigation was bad for business. Instead, he fought with surgical precision, wearing down his opponents until they yielded or collapsed from exhaustion. As the battle continued, Marcus kept one eye on his opponent and one on the senator's box. The young woman, his target, was watching the fight with an expression he'd never seen before in the faces of Rome's elite. Instead of bloodthirsty excitement or casual indifference, her features showed something that looked almost like Titus rallied, launching a series of devastating attacks that forced Marcus to focus entirely on survival. The massive gladiator's sword carved the air mere inches from Marcus's head, and the crowd screamed its approval. But Marcus had faced worse opponents, and his years of secret training, the skills passed down by an old Greek slave who'd been both thief and assassin, served him well. He ducked under a wild swing and drove his elbow into Titus's solar plexus, following up with a precise cut across the back of his opponent's sword arm. The blade fell from nerveless fingers, and Titus dropped to one knee, gasping for breath. The crowd fell silent, waiting for the killing blow. Marcus raised his gladius, playing to their expectations, but his eyes were on the senator's box. The older man, Senator Lucius Valentinus, if Marcus's information was correct, was making the traditional thumbs-down gesture, demanding death. But the young woman beside him had her thumb turned up, her face pale but determined. She was pleading for mercy. For a heartbeat, Marcus hesitated. In all his years in the arena, no member of the elite had ever shown genuine concern for a defeated gladiator's life. They saw the fighters as animals, entertainment to be consumed and discarded. Yet this woman, this supposed target of his next theft, was risking social disapproval to save the life of a man she'd never met. The moment stretched like drawn wire. Then Marcus made his choice. He stepped back, lowering his sword in the traditional gesture of mercy. The crowd erupted in mixed cheers and boos. Some appreciated the unexpected show of honor. Others felt cheated of their blood. But Marcus only had eyes for the young woman in the senator's box. She was smiling now, relief written across her features, and when their gazes met across the vast expanse of the arena, something passed between them, a recognition perhaps, or the first spark of something far more dangerous. As he raised his sword in salute to the crowd, accepting their grudging approval, Marcus realized that his simple plan had become infinitely more complicated. He'd come to steal from this woman, but she'd already begun stealing something from him, something he'd thought lost forever in the blood and sand of his captivity. His capacity to feel. Back in the gladiator barracks, Marcus sat on his simple cot, methodically cleaning his weapons and armor. The other fighters gave him a wide berth, partly from respect his skill, partly from weariness of his reputation. They knew he was different, that he had resources and connections beyond the arena. What they didn't know was exactly how he'd acquired them. "Quite a show today, Shadow," came a familiar voice. Marcus looked up to see Decimus, his closest friend among the gladiators and his partner in their more lucrative ventures. The older man was grinning, his scarred face creased with amusement. "Thought you were going to gut Titus for sure. What changed your mind?" Marcus shrugged, not trusting himself to explain. How could he tell Decimus that a single look from a senator's daughter had shattered 12 years of carefully built hatred, that for just a moment he'd remembered what it felt like to be Marcus the farmer's son, instead of Marcus the killer and thief? "Just wasn't worth it," he said finally. "Titus has family. Kids." Decimus raised an eyebrow but didn't press. He'd learned to respect Marcus's decisions, even when he didn't understand them. "So, what's tonight's plan?" "That jewelry you spotted in the senator's box looked promising." Marcus's hand stilled on his sword blade. The plan. He'd almost forgotten. Tonight, during the feast that traditionally followed major games, he and Decimus would infiltrate the celebration. While the elite gorged themselves on wine and exotic delicacies, Marcus would slip into the senator's private chambers and relieve his daughter of some of her more portable wealth. It should have been simple. It should have been just another job. So why did the thought of it now make his stomach turn? "We go ahead as planned," he heard himself say, though the words felt like ash in his mouth. "But we're careful. No unnecessary risk." Decimus nodded and moved away, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. He closed his eyes and tried to summon the familiar fire of his hatred for Rome's elite, the burning need for revenge that had sustained him through years of captivity and combat. But instead of anger, all he could see was a young woman's face, pale with concern for a stranger's life. All he could remember was the way she'd smiled when he'd shown mercy, as if his single act of compassion had somehow restored her faith in humanity. Marcus opened his eyes and stared at his calloused hands, hands that had killed, hands that had stolen, hands that had been shaped by 12 years of violence and crime. For the first time since his enslavement, he wondered if they might be capable of something else, something better. As the sun set over Rome, casting long shadows across the barracks, Marcus began to prepare for what he told himself would be just another theft. But deep in his heart he knew that nothing would ever be simple again. The young woman in the senator's box had already stolen something precious from him, his certainty that all of Rome's elite were monsters. And tonight, whether he succeeded in his mission or not, he suspected he was about to lose something even more valuable, his carefully guarded heart. The Villa Valentinus blazed with the light of 1,000 oil lamps, their flames dancing across marble columns and gilded frescoes that depicted the glory of Rome's conquests. The sound of laughter, music and animated conversation drifted through the night air as the city's most powerful citizens celebrated another day of blood and spectacle in the arena. Marcus crouched in the shadows of the villa's elaborate gardens, his dark clothing allowing him to blend seamlessly with the night. Beside him, Decimus adjusted his servant's tunic, their chosen disguise for infiltrating the celebration. The plan was simple. Decimus would create a distraction among the kitchen staff, while Marcus slipped into the main house to locate Senator Valentinus's private chambers. "Remember," Decimus whispered, his weathered face serious in the moonlight, "we're after portable wealth only. Jewelry, coins, small statuary. Nothing that will be immediately missed." Marcus nodded, though his heart wasn't in it. All day he'd been haunted by the memory of the young woman's face. Aurelia. He'd learned her name was from careful questioning of arena servants. The way she'd pleaded for Titus's life had shattered something inside him, some carefully constructed wall between himself and the humanity he'd thought lost forever. "You seem distracted tonight, Shadow," Decimus observed, using Marcus's arena name. "Having second thought." "Never," Marcus lied smoothly. "Let's move." They separated at the villa's service entrance, Decimus slipping toward the kitchens while Marcus scaled a decorative trellis to reach the second-floor balcony. The climb was effortless. Years of training had made him as comfortable in vertical spaces as on solid ground. He'd learned these skills from Cassius, an old Greek thief who'd been enslaved alongside him before the man had died protecting Marcus from a brutal trainer. The balcony doors were unlocked, typical aristocratic arrogance, assuming their wealth and status made them untouchable. Marcus slipped inside, finding himself in what appeared to be a young woman's chambers. Silk curtains in deep blue hung from the windows, and the air carried the faint scent of jasmine and roses. Expensive cosmetics and jewelry boxes adorned an ornate dressing table. His trained eye catalogued the room's valuable contents. A necklace of Mediterranean pearls, golden bracelets inlaid with precious stones, a silver mirror polished to perfection. Any one of these items would feed a family for months, yet to their owner they were mere accessories. Marcus approached the dressing table, his fingers already reaching for the pearl necklace, when a soft voice stopped him cold. "I wondered when you would come." He spun, his hand instinctively moving to the concealed blade at his waist, but froze when he saw who had spoken. Aurelia Valentina stood in the doorway, still wearing the elegant blue stola from the afternoon's games, though she'd removed her formal jewelry. In the lamplight she was even more beautiful than he'd thought, but it was her eyes that held him captive. They showed no fear, no alarm at finding an intruder in her private chambers. Instead, they held something that looked almost like expectation. "You're not screaming," Marcus said carefully, his mind racing. Had she somehow recognized him from the arena? Was this a trap? Aurelia closed the door behind her and moved deeper into the room, her movements graceful and deliberate. "Should I be?" Are you here to hurt me? Marcus found himself at a loss for words. In all his years of thievery, he'd never been caught in the act, never had to explain himself to a victim. The careful plans and escape routes he'd memorized seemed suddenly useless. You're the gladiator from this afternoon, she continued, moving to light another lamp. The additional illumination revealed the intelligence in her dark eyes, the way she held herself with quiet confidence, despite being alone with a man who could kill her without breaking a sweat. Marcus Maximus, they called you. The shadow thief. The name hit him like a physical blow. Somehow she knew exactly who and what he was. How? Aurelia smiled, her expression both sad and knowing. Did you think your reputation was limited to the arena? The servants whisper about you, Marcus. They say you steal from the wealthy to buy medicine for sick slaves, food for gladiator families. They say you're more ghost than man, that you can appear and disappear at will. Marcus's jaw tightened. His carefully cultivated anonymity, the thing that had kept him alive and free for years, was apparently common knowledge among the city's servants. If you know what I am, why aren't you calling for the guard? Because, Aurelia said softly, moving to sit on the edge of her bed, I've been waiting for someone like you. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Marcus studied her face, looking for deception, for the trap he was certain must be coming. But all he saw was a young woman who seemed somehow as trapped as he was, despite her obvious privilege and wealth. I don't understand. Aurelia was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight of sadness that surprised him. Do you know what it's like to be a caged bird, Marcus? To have everything you could want, fine clothes, jewels, servants to attend your every need, and yet to feel as though you're slowly dying inside. Marcus said nothing, but something in his expression must have encouraged her to continue. My father sees me as a political tool, she said, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I'm to be married next month to Senator Brutus's son, Quintus. It will strengthen our family's alliance, secure favorable trade agreements, ensure our continued prominence in Roman society. Her voice grew bitter. What I want has never been a consideration. The mention of Brutus hit Marcus like a lightning bolt. Senator Gaius Brutus, the man who had destroyed his family, who had been the architect of his enslavement. The coincidence seemed too impossible to believe. Brutus, he said, his voice barely a whisper. You know him? Aurelia looked up, noting the sudden tension in his posture. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. For 12 years, he'd dreamed of facing Brutus, of making the corrupt senator pay for what he'd done. And now, the fates had delivered the man's future daughter-in-law directly into his hands. The irony was almost overwhelming. We've met, he said finally. Aurelia studied his face, seeing something there that made her lean forward intently. He hurt you. I can see it in your eyes. The same look I see in the mirror sometimes. What did he do? For a moment, Marcus was transported back to that terrible day 12 years ago. He could smell the smoke from his burning home, hear his father's final words, see his mother's tears as the soldiers dragged him away in chains. The pain was as fresh as if it had happened yesterday. He took everything, Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. My family, my freedom, my future. Everything. Understanding dawned in Aurelia's eyes. That's why you became what you are. That's why you steal. Justice, Marcus corrected her. I take from those who have too much and give to those who have nothing. It's not theft, it's redistribution. And revenge? She asked quietly. Marcus met her gaze. That too. They sat in silence for several heartbeats. Two people from different worlds bound together by their mutual hatred of the same man. Finally, Aurelia stood and moved to her dressing table. Marcus tensed, unsure of her intentions, but she simply picked up the pearl necklace he'd been reaching for when she'd interrupted him. Take it, she said, holding the jewelry out to him. Take whatever you need. Marcus stared at her, confused. Why? Because you're the first person I've met who understands what it means to be trapped by circumstances beyond your control. Because you showed mercy today when the crowd wanted blood. Because, she paused, color rising in her cheek. Because I think you might be the answer to a prayer I didn't even know I was making. Marcus found himself stepping closer, drawn by something in her voice. What prayer? For freedom, she whispered. For escape from a life that isn't really living. For someone who sees me as more than just a political alliance waiting to happen. The air between them seemed to crackle with electricity. Marcus was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the way the lamplight played across her features, of the fact that she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. But more than that, he was drawn to the courage it must have taken for her to stay here, to speak to him instead of fleeing or calling for help. I should go, he said, though he made no move to leave. Should you, Aurelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper, or should you stay and tell me about the world outside these walls, about freedom, about choice, about what it means to fight for something you believe in? Marcus knew he was standing at a crossroads. Everything in his training, every instinct honed by years of survival, told him to take the jewelry and flee. This woman was dangerous, not because she might betray him, but because she made him want things he'd given up hope of ever having. But when she looked at him with those intelligent, understanding eyes, when she spoke of freedom and choice with the same longing that had driven him through 12 years of captivity, Marcus found himself unable to leave. Instead, he did something he'd never done before in all his years as a thief. He sat down, setting aside his mission, his carefully laid plans, and his hard-won caution, and began to tell his story to a woman whose father's allies had destroyed his life. As the night deepened around them and the sounds of the celebration continued below, two prisoners of very different circumstances began to discover that sometimes the most dangerous theft of all is when someone steals your heart. Outside, Decimus waited in the gardens, wondering why his partner hadn't appeared at their designating point. But Marcus had forgotten all about escape routes and careful timing. For the first time in 12 years, he was remembering what it felt like to be truly alive. Marcus had told many lies in his life. Lies to guards, lies to masters, lies to fellow gladiators who asked too many questions about his nocturnal activities. But as he sat across from Aurelia, in the soft glow of oil lamps, he found himself telling the truth with a rawness that surprised even him. I was 16 when they came, he said, his voice steady, despite the pain that always accompanied these memories. My father, Gaius Maximus, owned a small farm outside the city. We grew olives and raised sheep. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Aurelia leaned forward, her attention complete. She had dismissed her servants hours ago, and the sounds from the celebration below had gradually faded as guests departed or passed out from too much wine. In the privacy of her chambers, with moonlight streaming through the windows, it felt as though they existed in a world apart from the brutal realities of Roman society. What happened? She asked softly. Marcus's hands clenched unconscious. Senator Brutus claimed we owed back taxes my father had paid in full, with receipts to prove it. But Brutus had connections in the tax collection office, friends who were willing to lose certain records for the right price. He wanted your land. Our farm bordered his estate. He'd been trying to buy it for years, but my father refused to sell, so Brutus decided to take it. Marcus's voice grew hard. When the soldiers came, my father tried to show them the receipts. Brutus himself was there, sitting on his horse like some conquering general. He just smiled and said documents could be forged. Aurelia's face was pale in the lamplight. Your father fought back. He died protecting what was ours, Marcus said simply. They cut him down in front of our house while my mother screamed. I tried to fight, stupid really, a 16-year-old farm boy against trained legionaries. They clubbed me unconscious and threw me in chains. And your mother? Your sister? The old pain flared fresh and sharp. My mother died of grief within a year or so, I heard from other slaves. My sister Livia, Marcus's voice broke slightly. She was only 14. Beautiful, innocent. They sold her to a brothel keeper. I've been searching for her ever since, but he didn't need to finish. They both knew what happened to young girls sold into that life. The lucky ones died quickly. Aurelia was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the horror of his story. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I had no idea that Brutus was capable of such cruelty. Now you know why I can't let you marry his son, Marcus said, the words out before he could stop them. Aurelia looked up sharply. What? Marcus realized what he'd said and felt heat rise in his cheeks. I mean, you shouldn't have to marry someone whose father is a monster. But Aurelia was studying his face with those perceptive eyes, seeing more than he wanted to reveal. That's not what you meant, is it? The question hung between them like a sword waiting to fall. Marcus found himself unable to look away from her, unable to lie, unable to pretend that his feelings were purely motivated by justice or revenge. The truth was far more dangerous and far more complicated. No, he admitted quietly, it isn't. Aurelia stood and moved to the window, looking out over the moonlit gardens. What are you saying, Marcus? He rose as well, drawn to her despite every instinct screaming that he was treading on dangerous ground. I'm saying that in one day you've made me question everything I thought I knew about Roman nobility. I'm saying that when I look at you, I don't see Senator Valentinus's daughter or a political alliance. I see a woman who showed mercy to a stranger, who speaks of freedom like she understands what it means to be trapped. And her voice was barely a whisper. Marcus stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the jasmine in her hair, close enough to see the rapid rise and fall of her breathing. And I'm saying that for the first time in 12 years, I'm thinking about something other than revenge. Aurelia turned from the window to face him, and the raw emotion in her eyes nearly undid him. Marcus, I can't. The marriage contract has already been signed. The ceremony is in 3 weeks. If I were to dishonor my family, what about dishonoring yourself? Marcus interrupted, his voice passionate. What about the fact that you'll be binding your life to the son of a man who destroys families for sport? What about your dreams, your desires, your right to choose your own fate? You don't understand, Aurelia said, though her protest sounded weak even to her own ears. I'm not free like you think I am. My father has debts, huge debts from failed business ventures. This marriage will clear them and restore our family's standing. If you refuse, you'll be free. I'll be disowned, cast out with nothing. Do you know what happens to women without family or fortune in Rome? Marcus knew. He'd seen enough of the city's darker corners to understand exactly what fate awaited women who fell from grace. But he also knew something else, something that surprised him with its intensity. You wouldn't be alone, he said quietly. Aurelia's eyes widened. What are you saying? I'm saying, Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would change everything between them. I'm saying that I would protect you, that I would find a way to keep you safe, to give you the life you deserve. A gladiator and a thief? Aurelia's laugh was half hysterical. What kind of life could you offer me? An honest one, Marcus replied without hesitation. One where you're valued for who you are, not what political advantages you can provide. One where your opinions matter, where your dreams have value. Tears were streaming down Aurelia's face now. You're talking about fantasy, Marcus. About impossible things. Am I? He reached out, gently wiping away her tears with his thumb. The simple touch sent electricity racing through both of them. 3 months from now, I'll have earned enough prize money to buy my freedom. I have connections, people who can provide new identities, safe passage to other lands. We could disappear, Aurelia. We could start over somewhere that doesn't know or care about senators and gladiators. You're serious? It wasn't a question. She could see the truth blazing in his eyes. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. For a moment, Aurelia allowed herself to imagine it, a life of freedom, of choice, of love, freely given, rather than politically arranged. The vision was so beautiful it made her chest ache with longing, but reality crashed back like a cold wave. They would hunt us, my father, Brutus. They would never stop looking. Let them look, Marcus said fiercely. The world is bigger than Rome, Aurelia. There are places they'll never find us, places where we could be happy. And your revenge? Your quest for justice? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Maybe, he said slowly, the best revenge against a man like Brutus is to save something beautiful from his grasp. Maybe the best justice is to choose love over hate. The words hung in the air between them, profound and frightening in their implications. Aurelia stared at him, seeing not the feared gladiator or legendary thief, but a man who was offering to abandon 12 years of driving purpose for the chance at happiness with her. I need time, she whispered. It's too much. Too fast. Marcus nodded, though disappointment flickered across his features. I understand, but Aurelia, he caught her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with her soft ones. Don't take too long. Every day that passes brings your wedding closer, and I don't think I could bear to watch you pledge yourself to Brutus's son. A commotion from the gardens below interrupted them, the sound of running feet and shouted orders. Marcus tensed, his warrior instincts instantly alert. What is that? Aurelia asked, moving to the window. Marcus joined her, peering down into the moonlit grounds. Torch-bearing guards were spreading out across the villa, clearly searching for something or someone. Decimus, Marcus breathed. His partner must have been discovered. As if summoned by his thoughts, a figure burst from the bushes below, running desperately across the open lawn. Even from this distance, Marcus could see it was indeed Decimus. Blooded and limping, the older gladiator stumbled, nearly falling, and the pursuing guards closed in. Without thinking, Marcus started for the balcony door. I have to help him. Aurelia caught his arm. It's suicide. There are too many of them. He's my friend. My responsibility. I brought him here. And what about your responsibility to me? Aurelia's voice was desperate. You just asked me to run away with you, and now you're going to throw your life away on a hopeless rescue attempt. Marcus paused, torn between his loyalty Decimus and the promise of a future with Aurelia. The sounds of pursuit were growing closer. Soon the guards would think to search the house itself. There's another way, Aurelia said suddenly, the servants' tunnels. My father had them built to move wine and supplies without disturbing guests. They connect to the old aqueduct system. You could reach your friend and get both of you out safely. Marcus stared at her. Why would you help me save him? Because, Aurelia said, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. If I'm going to trust you with my life, I need to know that you're a man who keeps faith with his friends. The logic was sound, but Marcus could see deeper truth in her eyes. She was testing herself as much as him, seeing if she truly had the courage to defy everything she'd been raised to accept. Show me, he said. Aurelia led him to what appeared to be a solid wall, but when she pressed a hidden mechanism, a section swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. Follow this to the third junction, then take the left branch. It will bring you out near the stables. But Marcus, she caught his hand as he prepared to enter the tunnel. Come back to me. He turned, and for a moment they stood frozen, staring into each other's eyes. Then Marcus did something that 12 years of careful survival had taught him never to do. He acted on pure impulse. He kissed her. The kiss was desperate, passionate, full of all the longing and hope and terror of their impossible situation. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. I'll come back, Marcus promised, and when I do, I'll want your answer. Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the tunnel, leaving Aurelia alone with her racing heart and a choice that would determine the rest of her life. As she listened to the sounds of his footsteps fading into the distance, Aurelia touched her lips and whispered a prayer to Venus, goddess of love, asking for the courage to choose her heart over her duty. Outside, the manhunt continued, but in the depths of the ancient tunnels beneath the villa, a gladiator raced through the darkness to save his friend and secure his future. A future that now held the promise of something he'd thought lost forever: love. The tunnels beneath Villa Valentinus were older than the house above, carved from living rock by slaves whose names had been forgotten centuries ago. Marcus moved through them with practiced stealth, his bare feet silent on the ancient stone. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and old wine, and somewhere in the distance he could hear the echo of dripping water. 3 junctions, left branch, Aurelia's directions repeated in his mind like a prayer, though his thoughts kept returning to the kiss they'd shared. Even now, with Decimus in mortal danger and guards swarming the villa above, Marcus could still feel the soft warmth of her lips, still remember the way she'd trembled in his arms. He forced himself to focus. Decimus had saved his life more times than he could count in their years of partnership. The older gladiator had been like a father to him, teaching him not just the skills of thievery, but the importance of loyalty, of keeping faith with those who depended on you. Marcus would not abandon him now. The tunnel began to slope upward, and fresh air touched his face. He was nearing the exit. Marcus slowed his pace, listening carefully for sounds of pursuit or discovery. Through a crack in the stonework above, he could see torchlight flickering. The guards were still searching, but they seemed to be concentrating on the garden areas rather than the stable complex. The passage ended in what appeared to be a solid wall, but Marcus's exploring fingers found the hidden mechanism Aurelia had described. The stone panel swung inward with barely a whisper, revealing the interior of a hay storage building. The sweet scent of dried grass filled his nostrils as he emerged, crouching low among the bales to survey his surroundings. Through gaps in the wooden walls he could see the villa's courtyard. Decimus was there, on his knees in the center of a ring of armed guards, his hands bound behind his back. Blood streaked his face from a head wound, and his left arm hung at an unnatural angle, broken, most likely during his capture. But it was the figure standing before him that made Marcus's blood run cold. Senator Lucius Valentinus himself had come to interrogate the captured thief, and beside him stood another man Marcus recognized from a dozen nightmares, Senator Gaius Brutus. The architect of his family's destruction looked exactly as Marcus remembered: tall, aristocratic, with cold grey eyes and a mouth that seemed permanently curved in a slight sneer of contempt. So Brutus was saying, his cultured voice carrying clearly across the courtyard, "You thought you could steal from your betters and escape unpunished." Decimus spat blood onto the marble stones. "Go to Hades, you perfumed peacock." One of the guards struck him across the face with the butt of his spear, snapping the older man's head back. Marcus tensed, his hand moving instinctively to his concealed blade, but he forced himself to remain hidden. Rushing in now would only get them both killed. "Such language," Brutus said mockingly. "I suppose one cannot expect better from arena scum. Tell me, slave, where is your partner? The one they call the shadow thief." "What partner?" Decimus managed through swollen lips. "I work alone." Brutus smiled, expression devoid of warmth or humor. "Come now, we both know that's a lie. The shadow thief has been stealing from Rome's finest families for months, always disappearing like smoke whenever guards arrive. But tonight, fortune smiled upon us. Tonight we have bait to draw him out." Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. It was a trap. They were using Decimus to lure him into the open. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, to use the tunnels to escape while he still could. But even as the rational part of his mind catalogued escape routes, he knew he couldn't abandon his friend. "Marcus Maximus," Brutus continued conversationally, raising his voice slightly. "Yes, I know who you are. Did you think I wouldn't recognize the name? The son of that stubborn farmer who refused to sell me his pathetic little plot of land." Marcus went rigid. Brutus remembered him, remembered his family. "Such a tragedy. What happened to them?" the senator continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "The father dying so needlessly, the mother wasting away from grief, the pretty little daughter sold to pay their debts. What was her name? Livia. Decimus raised his head, confusion and dawning horror crossing his battered features. Marcus had never told him the full story of his enslavement, only that Brutus had been responsible. Now his friend was beginning to tan the true scope of the hatred that drove his partner. "Are you listening, boy?" Brutus called out. "I know you're here somewhere. Come out, and I'll make your friend's death quick and clean. Remain hidden, and I'll have him crucified slowly over the course of days. You know I have the authority." Marcus closed his eyes, torn between rage and despair. Brutus held all the power, all the advantages. Even if Marcus revealed himself, there was no guarantee the senator would honor his word about sparing Decimus. But there was something else, a memory tickling at the edges of his consciousness. Something Aurelia had said about the tunnels connecting to the old aqueduct system. Marcus had spent years studying the underground passages of Rome, learning every secret way in and out of the city. The aqueducts, his eyes snapped open. There was a way. Dangerous, nearly impossible, but possible. "I'm growing impatient," Brutus announced. "Guards, prepare the—" "I'm here." The voice cut across the courtyard like a blade, and every head turned toward its source. Marcus stepped from the shadows at the edge of the torchlight, his hands empty but his posture radiating deadly confidence. He had discarded stealth in favor of theatrical intimidation. Sometimes the best way to survive was to make your enemies believe you were more dangerous than you actually were. "Ah, there you are," Brutus said, smiling with genuine pleasure. "The famous shadow thief. You know, I've wondering for years what became of little Marcus Maximus. I must say you've grown into quite the formidable young man." "Let him go, Brutus," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fury burning in his chest. "Your quarrel is with me." "Indeed it is," the senator agreed. "But you see, I've grown rather fond of using other people's loyalty against them. It's so much more satisfying than simple violence." Marcus took a step forward, and instantly a dozen spear points swung in his direction. He raised his hands, showing empty palms. "What do you want?" "Justice," Brutus replied smoothly. "You've stolen from noble families, disrupted the natural order, spread dangerous ideas about equality and redistribution of wealth. Such crimes cannot go unpunished. The only crime here is what you did to my family." Marcus snarled. "Your family?" Brutus laughed. A sound like breaking glass. "Your father was a tax cheat who got what he deserved. Your mother was weak-minded, and your sister—" His smile turned cruel. "Well, she's been quite popular at Maximus's establishment. I understand she's developed quite a reputation for—" Marcus roared, and lunged forward, all strategy forgotten in a haze of red rage. The guards reacted instantly, spears converging on him, but Marcus's gladiator training served him well. He rolled beneath the thrusting points, came up with a guard's dagger in his hand, and buried it in the man's throat before anyone could react. Chaos erupted in the courtyard. Guards shouted orders, feet pounded on marble, steel rang against steel, but Marcus fought like a man possessed. Every technique Cassius had taught him, every skill honed in the arena's blood-soaked sand, focused into a whirlwind of lethal precision. He cut down 2 more guards before a spear butt caught him in the ribs, sending him staggering. Another guard's sword sliced across his shoulder, drawing a line of fire and blood. But Marcus kept fighting, kept moving, working his way inexorably toward where Decimus knelt bound and helpless. "Enough!" Brutus's voice cracked like a whip. "Take him alive, you fools! Dead, he's worthless to me." The guards shifted tactics, using their spears defensively to contain rather than kill. Marcus found himself slowly surrounded, bleeding from a dozen minor wounds, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He'd fought magnificently, but numbers and armor were beginning to tell. That was when the second part of his plan activated. A section of the courtyard's marble floor suddenly cracked and collapsed, revealing one of the old aqueduct channels beneath. Water that had been building pressure behind a hastily constructed dam came rushing through in a torrent, sweeping guards off their feet and turning the elegant courtyard into chaos. In the confusion, Marcus dove for Decimus, cutting his bonds with a concealed knife. "Can you run?" he shouted over the roar of rushing water. "Do I have a choice?" Decimus gasped back. Together they plunged into the flood, letting the current carry them into the ancient waterway. Behind them, Brutus screamed orders that no one could hear over the sound of rushing water and collapsing stone. The aqueduct channel was narrow and treacherous, filled with debris from centuries of neglect. Marcus and Decimus were battered against stone walls, scraped by fallen masonry, nearly drowned a dozen times as they were swept along in the artificial river, but the water carried them away from the villa, away from Brutus's guards, away from immediate death. They finally managed to grab hold of an iron grating that allowed them to pull themselves from the torrent. Both men lay gasping on a narrow stone ledge, exhausted and bleeding but alive. "How?" Decimus managed between ragged breath. "The tunnels," Marcus replied. "I found the old dam controls, opened the floodgates, dangerous as hell, but it worked." Decimus was quiet for a moment. "Then, he knew you, that senator. He knew your real name, knew about your family." Marcus nodded grimly. "Gaius Brutus. The man who destroyed everything I cared about. And now he knows you're still alive, still fighting." Decimus struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain in his broken arm. "This changes everything, Marcus. He won't stop hunting you now." "I know," Marcus said quietly. "Which means I have to disappear. Tonight." Decimus corrected. "We have to disappear." Marcus shook his head. "Not we, just me. You have a wife, Decimus. Children. You can go back to the Gladiator barracks, claim you were never here. Brutus has no evidence against you, and leave you to face this alone." "It was always going to be alone," Marcus said, though his thoughts turned immediately to Aurelia. "Some battles can't be shared." They made their way through the ancient tunnels, emerging finally in a section of the city far from the villa. Dawn was beginning to touch the eastern sky, and the streets were starting to show signs of early morning activity. Bakers heading to their ovens, farmers bringing produce to market. "Where will you go?" Decimus asked, as they prepared to part ways. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "There's something I have to do first. Someone I need to see." Decimus studied his friend's face and saw something there that surprised him, hope mixed with desperate fear. "The senator's daughter. You fell for her, didn't you?" There was no point in lying. "Yes." "Marcus," Decimus's voice was gentle but urgent. "She's one of them. Nobility. Even if she cares for you, she'll never give up her life of privilege to run away with a slave." "She's different," Marcus insisted, though doubt was beginning to gnaw at his certainty. "They're all different until it matters," Decimus said sadly. "Until they have to choose between love and everything they've ever known. Be careful, my friend. The heart can be the most dangerous battlefield of all." They clasped hands, and then Decimus was gone, disappearing into the growing crowd of mourning laborers. Marcus stood alone in the street, bleeding, exhausted, and facing a choice that would determine the rest of his life. He could flee Rome immediately, disappear into the wider world, and try to build a new identity far from Brutus's reach. It was the safe choice, the smart choice. Or he could return to Aurelia and discover whether the love they'd declared in the heat of passion could survive the cold light of reality. As the sun climbed higher over the eternal city, Marcus made his choice. He turned his steps back toward the villa, toward a woman who held his heart in her hands, and toward a future that promised either salvation or destruction. Behind him, in the ruins of the flooded courtyard, Brutus stood among the wreckage and smiled a cold, calculating smile. The boy had escaped, but that was acceptable. In fact, it was perfect. After all, wounded animals were so much easier to track. Aurelia had not slept. She stood at her window as dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, her hands pressed against the cool marble of the sill, her mind churning with everything that had transpired in the past few hours. The sounds of reconstruction echoed from the courtyard below, where servants worked to repair the damage from the mysterious flood that had allowed Marcus and his friend to escape. Her father's rage had been terrible to witness. Senator Valentinus had stormed through the villa like an avenging god, demanding answers no one could provide, threatening punishments that made even the household guards pale. But it was Senator Brutus's reaction that truly frightened her. The cold calculation in his grey eyes, the satisfied smile that played at the corners of his mouth as he examined the flooded ruins of the courtyard. Ingenious, he had murmured, running his fingers along the broken aqueduct channel. The boy has grown quite resourceful. This will make the hunt so much more entertaining. Now, as morning light filled her chambers, Aurelia found herself facing the throws Marcus had asked her to make. Everything had seemed so simple in the darkness, with his passionate words filling her ears and his gentle touch making her believe in possibilities she'd never dared imagine. But in the harsh clarity of daylight, with her father's fury still echoing through the house and her wedding to Quintus Brutus just weeks away, the fantasy seemed to crumble like morning mist. A soft knock at her door interrupted her brooding. "Enter," she called, expecting her personal slave, Claudia. Instead, her father stepped into the room, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. Senator Lucius Valentinus was a man accustomed to order, to having his commands obeyed without question. The events of the night had shaken him more deeply than he cared to admit. "Daughter," he said, his voice carefully modulated, despite his obvious agitation, "we need to discuss what happened last night." Aurelia's heart began to race, but she kept her expression neutral. "Of course, father, the theft was most disturbing. I'm grateful no one was seriously hurt." "Yes," Valentinus moved to stand beside her at the window, his gaze fixed on the courtyard below. "Most disturbing indeed. Tell me, did you see or hear anything unusual? Any sign of how the thieves gained access to our home?" The lie came easily to her lips. Years of navigating Roman politics had taught her the art of selective truth-telling. "I heard the commotion from the gardens, but I remained in my chambers, as you've always instructed during emergencies. I saw nothing that might help identify the intruders." Her father studied her face carefully, and for a moment Aurelia feared he could see through her deception. But whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him. "Good. You showed wisdom in staying hidden. These men were dangerous, gladiators and thieves who would not have hesitated to harm you if they'd encountered you." "Gladiators?" Aurelia asked, feigning surprise though her pulse quickened at the mention of Marcus's profession. "One of them at least. The leader, a man called Marcus Maximus, also known as the Shadow Thief. Senator Brutus recognized him from the arena." Valentinus's voice grew hard. "Apparently this criminal has been conducting a campaign of theft against noble families for months. Last night's raid was merely his boldest attempt yet." Aurelia forced herself to remain calm. "How terrible. I hope the authorities will apprehend him quickly." "Oh, they will," her father said with grim satisfaction. "Brutus has assured me of that. He's taking a personal interest in this case. Apparently he has some history with this Marcus character. A matter of unpaid debts and family honor." The casual dismissal of Marcus's tragedy, his family's destruction, reduced to unpaid debts, made Aurelia's stomach clench with revulsion, but she merely nodded, playing the part of the dutiful daughter who trusted her father's judgment in all things. "There is, however, another matter we must discuss," Valentinus continued. "Your wedding to Quintus has been moved forward. Senator Brutus feels that recent events make it advisable to conclude our family alliance as quickly as possible." Aurelia's blood turned to ice. "Moved forward? But father, I thought we had agreed on the Ides of—" "The ceremony will take place in 1 week," her father interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "Brutus is concerned that the current unrest in the city, these thefts, the growing boldness of the criminal classes, makes it dangerous to delay. Once you are married to his son, you'll have the protection of the Brutus name and household." 1 week, 7 days instead of the 3 weeks she'd counted on to make her decision, to find some way out of this trap that was closing around her. Aurelia felt as though she were drowning, pulled down by currents too strong to resist. I understand, Father," she managed to say. "Excellent." Valentinus seemed relieved by her compliance. "Brutus and Quintus will be joining us for the evening meal tonight. I want you to wear your finest stola, the blue silk with the golden trim, and that sapphire necklace your mother left you. It's important that you make a good impression." After her father left, Aurelia sank onto her bed, her hands trembling with a mixture of fear and desperate resolve. 1 week, Marcus had asked her to choose between duty and love, between the security of her arranged marriage and the uncertain promise of freedom with him. Now that choice had become far more urgent and far more dangerous. A movement in the garden caught her eye, and her heart leaped as she recognized a familiar figure moving stealthily among the olive trees. Marcus had returned, despite the obvious danger, despite the fact that half of Rome would now be searching for him. He was keeping his promise to come back for her answer. Aurelia quickly summoned Claudia, her most trusted servant, a woman who had been with their family since Aurelia was a child, and whose loyalty was beyond question. "My lady," Claudia entered with the quiet efficiency that made her invaluable. "I need you to carry a message," Aurelia said, moving to her writing desk. Discreetly, to someone in the garden. Claudia's eyebrows rose slightly, but she asked no question. Years of serving a senator's family had taught her the wisdom of selective blindness when it came to her employer's private affairs. Aurelia wrote quickly, "The villa is being watched. Guards at every entrance. Meet me at the Temple of Venus tonight, 1 hour after sunset. I have my answer." She folded the parchment and sealed it with wax, pressing her signet ring into the soft material. "Give this to the man by the olive grove. Dark hair, tall. Tell him it's from a friend of mercy." Claudia nodded and disappeared silent. Aurelia watched from her window as the servant made her way casually through the garden, apparently gathering herbs for the kitchen. The exchange was so subtle that even Aurelia almost missed it. A brief pause by the olive trees, a quick hand movement, and then Claudia was moving on, as if nothing had happened. Marcus emerged from concealment long enough to read the message, and even at this distance, Aurelia could see the tension in his posture ease slightly. He looked up toward her window, and though she stood in shadow, she knew he could see her. For a moment they simply stared at each other across the impossible divide of class and circumstance that separated them. Then he was gone, melting back into the foliage like the shadow his arena name proclaimed him to be. The rest of the day passed with agonizing slowness. Aurelia went through the motions of her daily routine, supervising the household staff, reviewing the wedding preparations that suddenly felt like her own funeral arrangements, enduring the fittings for her bridal gown. But her mind was far away, rehearsing the words she would say to Marcus, preparing herself for a conversation that would determine the course of both their lives. As evening approached, she dressed carefully for the family dinner, choosing the blue silk stola her father had requested and arranging her hair in the elaborate style befitting a senator's daughter. The sapphire necklace felt heavy around her throat, a beautiful chain that seemed more like a shackle with every passing moment. The dinner was a torment of false smiles and polite conversation. Quintus Brutus had arrived with his father, a young man of 26 with his parents' cold grey eyes and an air of casual cruelty that made Aurelia's skin crawl. He spoke of their upcoming marriage as though she were a prize horse he'd purchased, discussing her bloodlines and childbearing potential with the same detached interest he might show for livestock. "She'll give us strong sons," he told his father over the roasted peacock, as if Aurelia weren't sitting right beside him. "The Valentinus line has always bred true." "Indeed," Senator Brutus agreed, his calculating gaze fixed on Aurelia, "though I trust she understands the importance of loyalty to her family. Recent events have reminded us all how dangerous it can be when people forget their proper place in society." The veiled threat was unmistakable. Aurelia inclined her head gracefully, playing the part of the submissive bride-to-be while internally rage burned like Greek fire in her chest. These men saw her as property, a resource to be exploited for their political and financial advantage. They would consume her life, her dreams, her very identity, and never even notice what they had destroyed. "Father," she said sweetly, "might I be excused? The excitement of the day has left me rather weary." "Of course, my dear," Valentinus smiled indulgently. "You must rest well. Tomorrow we begin the final preparations for your wedding." Aurelia rose gracefully, curtsied to their guests, and made her way to her chambers. But instead of preparing for bed, she waited until the household had settled for the night, then donned a dark cloak and slipped out through the servants' entrance. The guards, focused on watching for intruders trying to get in, paid little attention to a cloaked figure leaving the villa. The Temple of Venus stood on a hill overlooking the city, its white marble columns gleaming in the moonlight. It was a place where young lovers traditionally came to seek the goddess's blessing, where marriage contracts were signed and wedding vows exchanged. Tonight, it would be the site of a very different kind of ceremony. Marcus was waiting for her in the temple's shadowed colonnade, his face grave in the flickering light of the sacred flames. He had cleaned his wounds and found fresh clothes, but Aurelia could see the exhaustion in his posture, the weight of everything he had endured. "You came," he said simply. "Did you think I wouldn't? After last night, after Brutus, after the danger you've been exposed to, I thought you might have reconsidered." Aurelia moved closer, studying his face in the uncertain light. "My father told me what happened. He said Brutus recognized you, that there's history between you." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Did he tell you what kind of history?" "He called it a matter of unpaid debts and family honor." "Is that what he called it?" Marcus's laugh was bitter. "I suppose that's one way to describe the systematic destruction of an innocent family." Aurelia reached out, her fingers tracing the bandage on his shoulder where a guard's sword had found its mark. "You're hurt. I'll live. The question is whether I'll live free or die in chains." Marcus caught her hand, pressing it against his chest, where she could feel the rapid beating of his heart. "What's your answer, Aurelia? Will you come away with me, or will you marry Quintus and try to forget that we ever met?" The moment of truth had arrived. Aurelia looked into Marcus's eyes and saw everything she had ever dreamed of: passion, adventure, the promise of a life lived on her own terms. But she also saw the reality of what such a choice would mean. Exile from everything she had ever known, the life of a fugitive, constant danger, and the knowledge that their love had destroyed 2 families and probably cost several lives. "The wedding has been moved up," she said quietly. "1 week from tonight." Marcus went very still. 1 week. "My father says it's for protection, but I think Brutus has other reasons. I think he suspects something." "Then we leave tonight," Marcus said urgently. "I have money hidden, enough to get us out of Rome. We can be in Gaul before they even realize you're missing, Marcus." Aurelia's voice broke slightly. "I can't." The words hung between them like a sword blade. Marcus stared at her, hope dying in his eyes like a flame being extinguished. "You can't?" he repeated numbly. Tears were streaming down Aurelia's face now, but her voice was steady. "If I disappear, my father will be ruined. Brutus will claim breach of contract, demand massive penalties that we can't pay. Our family will lose everything. Our home, our lands, our status. My younger brother Lucius is only 14. What happens to him when we're cast into poverty? So you choose them over us. I choose responsibility over selfishness," Aurelia said, though the words tasted like poison. "I choose protecting my family over my own happiness." Marcus stepped back as if she had struck him. "Your family? What about my family? What about what Brutus did to them? That's exactly why I can't do this." Aurelia's control finally cracked, her voice rising to a desperate cry. "Don't you see? If we run away together, we become just like him. People who destroy families to get what they want. I won't be responsible for turning my brother into another you, another person consumed by hatred and the need for revenge." The comparison hit Marcus like a physical blow. He staggered back, his face going white. "Is that what you think I am? A monster like Brutus?" "No," Aurelia said quickly, reaching for him. "No, that's not what I meant." But Marcus had already pulled away. "Yes, it is. You see me as the same kind of person who destroyed your comfortable little world. A barbarian. A criminal. Someone who takes what doesn't belong to him." "Marcus, please. I should have known," he said, his voice hollow with pain and betrayal. "Decimus warned me. He said nobility would never give up their privilege, not even for love. I should have listened." He turned to go, but Aurelia caught his arm. "Wait. There might be another way." Marcus stopped, not looking at her. "What way?" "Marry me as planned. But after the ceremony, after the contracts are signed and my family's honor is secure, then we could find a way to be together. Quietly, carefully." The suggestion hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Marcus turned slowly, his expression one of complete disbelief. "You want me to be your lover, while you're married to the son of the man who murdered my father?" Aurelia flinched at the brutal clarity of his words. "It wouldn't be like that. It would be exactly like that." Marcus interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. "You want the security of your noble marriage and the excitement of a dangerous affair. You want everything, Aurelia, without paying any price for it. That's not fair." "Fair?" Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You want to talk about fair? Your future husband's father destroyed my family, sold my sister into sexual slavery, and has spent 12 years hunting me like an animal. And you want me to hide in the shadows while you share his son's bed, bearing his children, playing the devoted wife by day, and the passionate lover by night. Tell me, Aurelia, what part of that sounds fair to you?" Aurelia was sobbing now, her carefully constructed facade crumbling completely. "I'm trying to find a solution that doesn't destroy everyone I love." "Everyone except me," Marcus said quietly. "What about what this would do to me? What about watching the woman I love pledge herself to my enemy? What about knowing that while I'm hiding in whatever hovel you set up for me, you're in his bed, in his arms, giving him everything I want more than my next breath? We wouldn't have to. Wouldn't have to what? Consummate your marriage? Have children? Play the loving wife convincingly enough that no one suspects you're betraying your vows?" Marcus shook his head. "You're asking me to help you live a lie, Aurelia. A lie that would slowly kill both of them." They stood facing each other in the moonlight, two people who loved each other desperately, but found themselves separated by a chasm too wide to bridge. Finally Aurelia spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then what do you want me to do? Tell me what choice I have that doesn't destroy innocent people." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his face a mask of pain and resignation. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but final. "I want you to be happy, Aurelia. I want you to marry Quintus and have beautiful children and live the life you were born for. I want you to forget about a foolish gladiator who thought for one moment that love could conquer the distance between our worlds." "Marcus, no, I'm leaving Rome tonight," he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "I won't be back. In time, this will all seem like a dream, a brief madness that you thankfully escaped." He started to walk away, but Aurelia's voice stopped him one final time. "I will never forget you," she said, her words carrying across the temple like a prayer. "I will never stop loving you, and I will spend the rest of my life regretting this moment." Marcus paused at the edge of the shadows, his back to her. "So will I," he said quietly. "But some loves are too dangerous to survive, and some prices are too high to pay." Then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness like the shadow his name proclaimed him to be, leaving Aurelia alone with her choice and the terrible knowledge that she had just sacrificed the only real happiness she had ever known for the sake of duty and family honor. As she knelt before Venus's altar and wept for what might have been, Neither she nor Marcus knew that their conversation had not gone unobserved. In the deeper shadows of the temple, a figure had watched and listened to every word, a spy in the service of Senator Brutus, who smiled coldly as he prepared to return to his master with news that would change everything. The hunt for Marcus Maximus was about to become far more personal and far more deadly than anyone could have imagined. 3 days had passed since Marcus left Rome, but Senator Gaius Brutus felt no satisfaction in his enemy's flight. The spy's report from the Temple of Venus had revealed something far more valuable than the location of a fugitive gladiator. It had exposed a weakness that could be exploited with devastating precision. "You're certain of what you heard?" Brutus asked his agent for the 3rd time, his cold grey eyes fixed on the man kneeling before his desk. "Every word, my lord." The spy confirmed. "The gladiator and Senator Valentinus's daughter have formed an attachment. She refused to flee with him, but the emotion between them was significant." Brutus smiled, an expression that would have chilled the blood of anyone who knew him well. For 12 years he had dreamed of crushing Marcus Maximus completely, not just killing him, which would be merciful and quick, but destroying him so thoroughly that death would come as a welcome release. "Perfect," he murmured. "Send word to our agents along the northern road. Find him, but do not apprehend him yet. I want to know exactly where he goes, who he speaks with, what route he plans to take out of Roman territory. And then, my lord, then we spring the trap that will bring him running back to Rome straight into our hands." Marcus had made it as far as the port city of Ostia when the message found him. He was sitting in a tavern near the docks, nursing a cup of sour wine and trying to convince himself that the hollow ache in his chest would eventually fade, when a young boy approached his table with a sealed parchment. "Marcus Maximus?" the child asked nervously. Marcus's hand moved instinctively to his concealed blade. Very few people knew his real name, and fewer still would know to look for him here. "Who's asking?" "A lady, sir. She said to give you this and to wait for your answer." The parchment bore no seal, but when Marcus unfolded it, he recognized Aurelia's elegant handwriting immediately. "Marcus, they have taken Claudia. Brutus claims she helped you escape. They will execute her tomorrow at noon, unless you surrender yourself. I know I have no right to ask anything of you after what I said, but she is innocent of everything except loyalty to me. Please forgive me." Marcus read the message twice, his hands trembling with rage and despair. Claudia, the kind servant who had carried Aurelia's note to him in the garden, who had shown him nothing but courtesy during their brief encounter. An innocent woman was going to die because of his relationship with her mistress. He looked up at the waiting boy. "When was this sent?" "This morning, sir." The lady said it was very urgent. This morning, which meant Claudia would die tomorrow, less than 18 hours from now. Even riding hard, it would take Marcus most of that time just to reach Rome, leaving no opportunity to plan or prepare. It was obviously a trap, so transparent that even a child could see through it. And Marcus knew he was going to walk straight into it anyway. "Tell the lady," he said, pressing a gold coin into the boy's palm, "that her message was received." After the child left, Marcus sat staring into his wine cup, seeing not the dark liquid, but Aurelia's face as she had looked in the temple, beautiful and heartbroken, and trying desperately to do the right thing for everyone she loved. She had chosen duty over happiness, responsibility over desire. She had sacrificed their love to protect her family. Now an innocent woman was going to die because of that choice, because of the connection between them that Brutus had discovered and decided to exploit. Marcus finished his wine and stood, his decision made. He couldn't save his relationship with Aurelia that had been doomed from the moment they met. Two people from worlds too different to ever truly merge. But he could save Claudia. He could ensure that at least one good person didn't pay the price for their impossible love. Even if it cost him everything, the execution was to take place in the Forum Romanum, in the shadow of the great temples where Roman justice was dispensed with ceremonial grandeur. A crowd had gathered despite the early hour. Executions were always popular entertainment, and the promise of seeing the capture of the notorious shadow thief had drawn spectators from across the city. Aurelia stood on the balcony of her father's house overlooking the forum, her face pale as marble and her hands gripping the stone railing so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Below she could see the wooden platform where Claudia knelt, her hands bound behind her back, her grey hair disheveled from 3 days of imprisonment. Senator Brutus stood beside the executioner's block, resplendent in his formal toga, addressing the crowd with the polished oratory that had made him one of Rome's most powerful politicians. Citizens, his voice boomed across the forum. Today we witness the price of treason, the fate that awaits those who would aid enemies of the state. This woman, a common servant, chose to assist a dangerous criminal in his escape. She knew the penalty, yet she chose disloyalty over duty. Aurelia closed her eyes, bile rising in her throat. Every word was a lie. Claudia had done nothing more than carry a message, an act of simple kindness that was now being twisted into high treason. But the crowd was eating it up, cheering Brutus's words, baying for blood with the enthusiasm that had made the gladiatorial games so popular. However, Brutus continued, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the forum. Rome is merciful. Even now, at this final hour, the true criminal has the opportunity to show himself, to spare this innocent woman's life, by surrendering to the justice he has so long avoided. The crowd fell silent, heads turning, eyes scanning the surrounding buildings and side streets. Everyone knew the story by now, the gladiator thief who had terrorized the noble families, who had somehow escaped from Brutus's own villa, who was rumored to have superhuman abilities and unnatural luck. Aurelia found herself holding her breath, torn between desperate hope and crushing fear. If Marcus came, Claudia would live, but he would die. If he didn't come, his absence would prove that their love had meant nothing to him, but he would remain free. Either outcome would destroy something precious. The sun climbed higher, approaching its zenith. The executioner tested his axe, drawing a few practice swings that made the crowd murmur with anticipation. Claudia remained kneeling, her head high despite her terror, refusing to give Brutus the satisfaction of seeing her beg. Then, as the first bell of noon began to toll across the city, a voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Let her go, Brutus. I'm here." Every head turned toward the source of the voice. Marcus stood at the edge of the forum, near the steps of the Temple of Jupiter, still wearing traveling clothes covered with road dust. He looked older than his 28 years, worn down by 3 days of hard riding and 12 years of constant vigilance, but his posture radiated the deadly confidence that had made him a legend in the arena. The crowd erupted in excited chatter, but Brutus raised his hand for silence, his cold smile spreading across his aristocratic features like oil on water. "Marcus Maximus," he called out, "the famous shadow thief. How good of you to join us." Marcus began walking across the forum, his movement measured and deliberate. Roman soldiers emerged from concealment behind pillars and in doorways, surrounding him with a ring of steel, but he paid them no attention. His eyes were fixed on Brutus, with an intensity that made several spectators step back nervously. "I said let her go," Marcus repeated as he reached the platform. "I'm the one you want." "Indeed you are," Brutus agreed. "But you see, young Marcus, this isn't simply about justice anymore. This is about teaching lessons, about showing what happens to those who defy their betters." From her vantage point, Aurelia could see the trap closing around Marcus like the jaws of some monstrous beast. More soldiers appeared, dozens of them, maybe 100, all armed and armored. Even if Marcus were the supernatural warrior the legends claimed, he couldn't fight that many opponents. "The lesson," Brutus continued, "is that love makes us weak. Compassion is a luxury that slaves and criminals cannot afford. You came here knowing you would die, all to save the life of a woman you barely knew. Such sentiment is admirable in poetry, but fatal in reality." Marcus had reached the platform now, close enough that Aurelia could see his face clearly. He looked tired and resigned, but there was something else in his expression, a kind of peace, as if he had finally found a burden he was willing to carry. "Maybe," he said quietly, But if love makes us weak, what does hatred make us? Because I've seen what it's done to you, Brutus. I've seen what it's done to me, and I'm tired of carrying it." The words seemed to surprise Brutus. He had expected defiance, rage, threats of vengeance. Instead, Marcus sounded almost serene. "Surrender your weapons," Brutus commanded. Marcus reached into his tunic and withdrew 2 daggers, letting them clatter to the stone platform. Then he removed a short sword from beneath his cloak, followed by several smaller blades hidden in his boots and belt. The pile of weaponry grew impressively large, drawing murmurs of amazement from the crowd. "Is that all?" Brutus asked mockingly. "All that matters," Marcus replied. Brutus gestured to his soldiers, who moved in to bind Marcus's hand. But as the first guard reached for him, Marcus did something unexpected. Instead of resisting, he knelt beside Claudia and spoke to her in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. "I'm sorry," he said simply, "for what happened to you because of me, for what's going to happen to all of us." Claudia, who had remained silent throughout her captivity, finally spoke. Her voice was cracked from thirst and fear, but her words carried clearly in the hushed forum. "Don't be sorry, young man. I've lived 70 years, and most of them were happy ones. But in all that time I never saw my lady smile the way she smiled when she spoke of you. That was worth something. That was worth everything." The simple statement hit the crowd like a physical blow. Suddenly this wasn't just about crime and punishment. It was about love and sacrifice, about the price people paid for caring about each other. Several women in the audience began to weep openly. Brutus, sensing that the mood was turning against him, gestured sharply to the executioner. "Enough sentiment. Let justice be done." But as the axeman raised his weapon, preparing to end Claudia's life, another voice rang out across the forum, a voice filled with authority and righteous anger. "Stop this madness." Senator Lucius Valentinus stood at the edge of the platform, flanked by a dozen of his own guards. His face was flushed with fury, and his hands trembled with emotion. "Brutus," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the forum, "I withdraw my consent to this execution." A shocked silence fell over the crowd. Brutus stared at his ally in disbelief. "Lucius, what are you doing?" "What I should have done 3 days ago," Valentinus replied. "This woman is a member of my household. Any crimes she may have committed are my responsibility to judge, not yours. She aided a criminal. She carried a message." Valentinus's voice cracked like a whip. A simple message between 2 young people who had the misfortune to fall in love across the barriers our society has built. That is not treason, Brutus. That is humanity. From her balcony, Aurelia stared at her father in amazement. She had never seen him defy anyone of Brutus's standing, had never heard him speak with such passion about anything other than politics and profit. Furthermore, Valentinus continued, "I hereby dissolve the marriage contract between my daughter and your son. The dowry negotiations are cancelled, the agreements null and void." The crowd gasped. Such a public rejection of a marriage alliance was almost unheard of in Roman society. It would cost Valentinus enormous amounts of money and social standing. Brutus's face had gone white with rage. "You cannot do this, Lucius. The contracts are signed, the arrangements made. You'll be ruined, financially and socially." "Then I'll be ruined," Valentinus said simply. "But I won't be a party to this obscenity any longer." He turned to address the crowd directly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "Citizens of Rome, look at what we have become. We condemn young people for loving each other. We execute servants for showing kindness. We destroy families to satisfy our greed and ambition. Is this the glory of Rome? Is this the civilization we're so proud of?" The forum was completely silent now, every person hanging on his words. "This young man," Valentinus gestured to Marcus, "has committed crimes, yes. He has stolen from the wealthy, disrupted the order we hold so dear. But do you know why? Because 12 years ago, Senator Brutus destroyed his family, seized their land through false accusations, killed his father, enslaved his mother and sister, all to add a few more acres to his estate. Brutal murmurs arose from the crowd. The story of Marcus's tragedy, told with the authority of a senator's voice, carried weight that gladiator legends never could. And this servant, Valentinus continued, this woman who kneels ready to die for carrying a message, do you know what her crime truly was? She believed that love was stronger than law, that mercy was more important than social order. She was wrong, perhaps, but is that really a sin worthy of death? Brutus was frantically trying to regain control of the situation. The law must be upheld. Order must be maintained. If we allow sentiment to override justice. Justice? Valentinus turned on him with blazing eyes. You want to talk about justice? Then let's discuss the justice of what you did to the Maximus family. Let's examine the evidence of those tax records you claimed were forged. Let's talk about the witnesses who disappeared, the documents that were lost, the officials who suddenly became very wealthy around the time you acquired that land. The accusation hung in the air like a sword. Brutus had gone pale, realizing that his old ally had just publicly accused him of corruption and murder. You have no proof, he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Don't I? Valentinus smiled grimly. I've spent the last 3 days reviewing old records, talking to retired officials, piecing together the truth I should have investigated years ago. Would you like me to share what I've discovered? For the first time in the entire confrontation, Brutus looked genuinely afraid. His eyes darted around the forum, measuring distances, calculating escape routes. But Marcus was no longer paying attention to the political maneuvering. His focus had shifted to something else. Movement in the crowd that shouldn't have been there, the glint of steel beneath cloaks, the way certain spectators were positioning themselves despite the shifting mood of the forum. Brutus had planned for the possibility of exposure, had prepared a final solution that would eliminate all the witnesses and evidence at once. Aurelia Marcus breathed, looking up toward the balcony where she stood watching the proceedings. If Brutus was desperate enough to order a massacre in the forum, her father's defiance had just painted a target on her entire family. The first knife flew before Marcus could shout a warning, spinning end over end toward Senator Valentinus's back. But Marcus was already moving, his body responding with the trained reflexes of a gladiator. He launched himself from the platform, his bound hands making the movement awkward, but not impossible, and tackled Valentinus to the ground just as the blade whispered through the space where the senator's heart had been. Chaos erupted in the forum. Brutus's hidden assassins threw off their concealment and attacked. But the implication was clear to everyone present. Senator Valentinus was giving his blessing to a union between his daughter and a former gladiator, a match that would have been unthinkable just hours earlier. But the choice was still Aurelia's to make. She stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. Father, I appreciate your wisdom and your trust in my judgment, but there is something I must say first. She turned to Marcus, her eyes holding his with an intensity that made the rest of the world seem to fade away. 3 days ago, in the Temple of Venus, I told you that I couldn't choose love over duty. I said that some prices were too high to pay. I was wrong, Marcus. I was a coward who hid behind noble words because I was afraid of losing everything I'd ever known, afraid of a future I couldn't control, afraid of being truly alive instead of just existing. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. But today, when I thought I was going to lose you forever, when I saw you risk everything to save an innocent woman, today I learned that the only price too high to pay is the one that costs us our souls. I would rather be poor and free with you than rich and trapped without you. I would rather face an uncertain future at your side than live a predetermined life in golden chains. She knelt before him, a gesture that shocked the crowd, a senator's daughter kneeling before a former slave. Marcus Maximus, will you accept the hand of a foolish woman who took too long to understand what truly matters? Will you forgive me for choosing fear over love, and give me the chance to choose correctly this time?" Marcus stared down at her, this incredible woman who had just publicly declared her love for him in front of half of Rome. He thought about Decimus's warnings, about the voice in his head that insisted this was still impossible, that love couldn't truly bridge the gap between their worlds. Then he thought about Claudia's words. "In all that time, I never saw my lady smile the way she smiled when she spoke of you." That was worth something. That was worth everything. He knelt as well, taking Aurelia's hands in his scarred and colliersed one. "Aurelia Valentina," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you have nothing to apologize for, and nothing to forgive. You chose to protect your family at the cost of your own happiness. That wasn't cowardice. That was courage. But if you're willing to take a chance on a future, we'll have to build together. If you're willing to trust that love really can conquer the distance between our worlds, then yes, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that trust." The crowd erupted in cheers. It was like something from the old stories, the myths and legends their grandparents had told about gods and heroes, and love that conquered all obstacles. Here in the harsh reality of Roman politics and social hierarchy, two young people had found each other across impossible barriers and chosen to believe that their love was stronger than the forces trying to keep them apart. Senator Valentinus smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "Then, by the authority of Roman law and with the blessing of the gods, I declare this union sanctioned and approved. May Venus smile upon your marriage, and may your love be a beacon of hope for all who witness it." As Marcus and Aurelia stood and embraced, as the crowd cheered and threw flower petals taken from the nearby temple offerings, as even the stern Roman guards smiled at the fairy tale ending to a day that had begun with such darkness, no one noticed the small figure watching from the shadows of a side street. Claudia, freed from her chains and forgotten in the chaos, stood with tears streaming down her weathered face. She had served the Valentinus family faithfully for 30 years, had watched Aurelia grow from a precocious child into a beautiful young woman. She had seen her lady's heart slowly dying in the golden cage of Roman nobility. Today, she had also seen it come alive again. "Thank you," she whispered to whatever gods might be listening. "Thank you for letting me live long enough to see her happy." Then she turned and walked away, melting into the Roman crowd, like just another elderly servant going about her daily business. She had work to do, a wedding to plan, a household to prepare for the most celebrated love story Rome had seen in a generation. Behind her, Marcus and Aurelia stood in the center of the forum, surrounded by cheering citizens and falling flowers, their hands clasped and their eyes locked on each other's faces. They had paid a steep price for their love. Marcus had sacrificed his quest for revenge. Aurelia had risked everything she'd ever known. But in this moment, with the whole world celebrating their courage, it felt like the bargain was worth it. "So," Aurelia said softly, her voice barely audible over the crowd's acclaim, "what happens now?" Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his battle-scarred face into something radiant with hope and joy. "Now," he said, we build a life together, based on love instead of duty, on choice instead of obligation. We prove that sometimes fairy tales can come true, even for gladiators and senators' daughters." "Especially for gladiators and senators' daughters," Marcus replied, pulling her close. "After all, the best love stories are the ones everyone says are impossible." As the sun set over Rome, painting the marble temples and noble houses in shades of gold and rose, two people who had found each other across the barriers of class and circumstance stood together in the forum and planned their future. It wouldn't be easy. There would be social obstacles to overcome, political ramifications to navigate, and the simple challenge of merging two very different lives into one shared existence. But they would face it together, with the knowledge that their love had already survived the greatest test of all, The choice between what was expected and what was right, between the safe path and the true path, between existing and truly living. In the end, the gladiator had stolen something far more valuable than gold or jewels or political advantage. He had stolen the heart of a woman brave enough to love him back, and in doing so, had discovered that the greatest victories were not won in the arena, but in the quiet moments when two souls chose each other against all odds. The crowd eventually dispersed, the senators returned to their villas, and the merchants closed their shops. But in the growing darkness of the Roman evening, with stars beginning to appear in the purple sky above, Marcus and Aurelia remained in the forum, hands clasped, hearts full, ready to begin the greatest adventure of all, a life built on love, freely chosen and freely given. They had both learned that some things were worth any price, and that the most precious treasures were not stolen, but shared willingly between two people who understood that love was not a weakness to be exploited, but a strength to be celebrated. In the end, the gladiator had stolen everything that mattered, not gold or glory, but hope, happiness, and a future bright with infinite possibility. And that, as any true lover knows, is the greatest theft of all.